Indigenous Identities in the region referred to as Latin America. And that is to say, CalTAC, and I am a co-founding member of CalTAC. My name is Carmen Aguirre. CalTAC stands for Canadian Latinx Theater Artists Coalition. We are beyond honored to have our 3 guests here with us today, all of whom came from out of town. I did ask in an email for each of you to introduce yourselves. If you're not comfortable with that for any reason, I do have your bio. If you prefer for me to just read out your bio or do both, it's up to you. Yeah, great. So let's start with Monique.
Nuedi, Nuegambi, Anuga Olo Nadili, Olo Edidili, Ngano Sokta. My name is Monique Mojica. I am Kuna and Rappahannock by birth and adopted into the Cayuga Bear Clan of the Haudenosaunee at Six Nations, which was done so that my son, who could not inherit his father's clan, would be able to participate in his ceremonial and governmental life of his nation. I am generation 3 of 4 generations of performing artists in my family, which goes from my grandfather, who did medicine shows and side shows and dance for tourists in order to feed his family during the Great Depression in the 30s, to my mother and her sisters who formed Spider-Woman Theater in the 70s, to myself and my cousin Muriel Borst, who is the director of Safe Harbors Indigenous Collective at La Mama in New York, to my son, who is a founding member of a tribe called Red, bear witness. So that's my artistic lineage. And for the last just over 20 years, my focus has been on land-based embodied research for the purpose of developing land-based embodied dramaturgies for Indigenous performance. So, Noedi.
Hello, hi. Ani Bojo, ¿cómo están? Buenas tardes. My name is Carlos Rivera. I'm from Mexico. This side of my heart belongs to Nahua people. The other side of my heart belongs to Mixteco people, Nusavi, the people of the rain. That's what Mixteco means. The country or the land where the clouds and the land meets. That's Mixteco. Nahuatl is what is called now Nahuatl, but it's Mojica, which other people call Aztecs. So Mojica, the belly button of the word, Mexico City, Mexico Tenochtitlan. So my family comes from the mountains in Puebla, Sierra Norte, in the central east part of Mexico. So I'm super glad that I have been accepted in this land by Indigenous people from Canada who allowed me to work, live, and create in this beautiful land. So thank you so much.
Chekiech dinamit, rembi kaplu bats, rembi logla ishimuleu, rembi dinamit kakchikel kichemaya. Buenas tardes, pueblo, barrio. Me llamo 12 Monos. Soy de la tierra de maíz, o Guatemala. Mis ancestros son de Ishimuleo. Y estoy aquí de parte de mi pueblo Quiche y Cacchiquel. Artistically, I work a lot behind the scenes in the performing arts. A bit of a shit disturber with regards to advocacy and in diversity and things like that. I also work a lot with in social justice First Nations, Indigenous communities, specifically working with the youth, as well as a performer creator for the performing arts.
All right, thank you so much. Now, I hope to disappear completely from this session, not physically. But I really would love it to just, as much as possible, be a conversation between the three of you. We do have time. We have like 2 full hours. There might be a pee break somewhere in there. And I just want to start it off by, there's a few things that we could address. I think that one thing that might be helpful for all of us, and I include myself, is what is the difference between being Indigenous in the region referred to as Latin America and being Indigenous in the region referred to as North America? Why do I ask that? Somebody like myself, who is 50% Indigenous, I do not identify as Indigenous. I would consider myself being completely disrespectful of Indigenous peoples of what is now Chile, if I walked around saying, hey man, I'm Mapuche, right? Even though half of me is, right? So I think that there is a little bit of a confusion as to the term Indigenous for people like me and many of us who are mestizos, right? Mixed. So any one of you can start, and hopefully I will not say too much more at this point.
I'm asking Carlos to start because the three of us have very different experiences, which I think makes this conversation rich, but Carlos is the one among the three of us who was born and raised and trained in Mexico, so.
Thank you. Well, that's a really great question, no? And I think so that's what we are dealing with. Many people who we were born in Latin America, so it's a conversation that we started a long time ago in our homes, in asking our parents where we are coming from, asking our grandmothers or grandparents where we are coming from, looking into the map, going to the region, asking our communities, we belong to you or we don't belong to you. Because sometimes, you know, when you immigrate, even like in my family, from the mountains in Sierra Norte, Puebla, to Mexico City, which is only 6 hours away, we were considered like immigrants, no? So we immigrate. My family, my grandma took the decision to take her 8 children and move from that region to Mexico City because she was tired of living with this strong guy, grandfather who was, you know, beating her and abusing her. And she decided to move to Mexico City. And when she arrived to the city with no Spanish, no, wearing her traditional clothing and no education. So first thing that she faced was, you know, not being accepted as Mexican, you know? So what she did is this incredible transformation. So what I call like erasing herself, like to be accepted into a mainstream community, sometimes we need to transform ourselves. And that's exactly, in some ways, to be accepted in Canada, we transform ourselves. So I am a clear example of that. When I arrived to Canada, I was not able to speak any word in English because I refused to learn the language. Because as a little boy, in my brain, I was questioning me and questioning the school system in Mexico, and my thing was, why I need to learn another colonial language? I already have too much with one. Now I need to learn 2. And now I live in Montreal, so I need to learn a 3rd one. So, you know, but that's also a tool. So language is a tool to communicate, to build bridges, you know? So I think so the circumstance is really hard. I totally understand. Yesterday we hear about Latin America is one of the most racist regions in the world. And Mexico, ooh. we are extremely racist. Not just whites against white Mexicans, against brown Mexicans, brown Mexicans against brown Mexicans, brown Mexicans against black Mexicans against everyone, and that's a thing. That's a culture that the system and the government build to have people divided, to control people. And there was a time where the Mexican government have this idea, and I grew up with that, like thinking that we were the race of bronze. We were equal because we have same color of skin, but the mainstream society, the media, or things at school even, you see the difference right away, and you were treated in a different way. So in Mexico, at least at the time when I grew up there, so to speak about you being indigenous, it was really hard. I know this because my grandmother, she stopped totally talking her language. My father grew up not speaking the language too, and we have a huge debate back home. When, usually at Christmas, we start hugging to each other and say, hey, we are here. And at the end of the day, of the night, we were having these fights about the Indians, of the indigenous, and the non-indigenous. So the ones that mix with other races, and they were separate at the end of the table. And the other side, we were the ones that we identify as an indigenous. So for me, I think it's a very personal thing to identify yourself, and it's a responsibility that I have. I don't want to impose that in anyone else. I do it by myself. So I went, I researched, I asked, I have conversations with my grandmother, with my mom, with my grandparents, with the people in the community, and I went back to the land and I questioned myself. Where you are from, who you are you part of this? You're not part of this? And I start the process of getting back that to me, getting back my identity. Still, there is so many things to go. I always ask myself, what you're pretending to go in Quebec, in Montreal, and getting to learn French and not getting back to Puebla and learn Nahuatl? Why you not go back to your community? You face your cousins, your aunties, and your uncles who stay there, who speak the language, and you're not helping them and to learn to be a farmer and to grow corn and beans and tomatoes, which is the base of Mexican food. Why you don't go back to your community and relearn the traditional teachings, the dances, and all those kind of things? That's my personal journey. I don't know exactly where I am, but I know, I recognize that I have that responsibility on me. I don't want to push that on anyone else, but that's me. Growing up in Mexico, we face many things. I just want to tell you a story. I know I'm holding the mic a lot, but we have 2 hours. And I'm just learning from Bea. So, what the fuck, eh? Yeah, okay. Sorry. I always, this is something, I want to tell you 2 things. Lots of people who speak English, when you swear, you say, pardon me, my French. And when you're in Montreal, I never hear someone from Montreal, if they swear, apologizing themselves. I understand that's a racist thing too. French is such a beautiful language, and they swear so beautifully. As people that we swear in Spanish too, no? And I learned that swearing in indigenous language is also very beautiful too. So, okay, When I was a little boy, and yesterday I hear a beautiful story from you when you were to Langara College, no? And you met these people who were from Guatemala, no? Working. My mother was also a person. I went to school, elementary school in Mexico, where my mom was the janitor, no? The person who cleaned the school. So I grew up watching my mom wearing his long hair, beautiful, you know, 2 braids all the way, and she was cleaning the school. So I remember I was in grade 3 or 4, something like that, and I hear one of my classmates calling my mom, "You dirty Indian, no? You need to go back to your land." And I was so mad. I went and I punched this guy. Anyway, so I was called to the principal office, of course. You know? So, and my mom was working at the school too. So she was so in one moment, so embarrassed and in one way. So she was called also to the principal office. And I was in the principal office, sobbing, you know, and crying, and my mom was there, and the principal just said to me, like, "What, you did that?" And I don't have words to describe it well. And my mom was there, like, apologizing and trying to control the teen, and the principal said just to me, like, "You need to control yourself. Fighting, punching is one way, but thinking and reflecting about that, that's another way. So I want to offer you that you have this, but also you have this and this to change that." I remember very well going out to the school, walking from the school to home, and my mom was cleaning my tears. She was also crying. We were crying. And she said to me, "I'm so proud of you that you defend me, but also you defend yourself and you defend who we are." And she said to me, "Promise me that you never are going to be ashamed about when people calling you brown skin, Indian, indigenous." So that was the best teaching that I have from my mom. Best teaching. And yesterday I hear that it's our moms who's inspiring us to write things, no? And we're here today. So that's my lead story for you. I love that story. I love you, Mom.
Well, I'm both Central American Indigenous and North American Indigenous, and I'm fiercely, fiercely connected and identified with both. The Rappahannock are part of the Powhatan Confederacy, and that's in the area now called Virginia, which was the first British colony in the US. So that's where Americans think they started it all, and we got hit hard. My great-grandmother left Virginia right after the American Civil War and part of the first wave that was escaping the South. She ended up in Brooklyn. My grandfather, Sulup Ebia, also known as Antonio Miguel Mojica, was born on the island of Yandup Nargana, which is in the northwestern part of Cunayala. And before I go on with my personal story, I feel I need to acknowledge all of those people who are here now across the lands, who are putting their bodies in harm's way in resistance right now and in support of the Wet'suwet'en and all indigenous resistance from the beginning, from the first step. And I also need to acknowledge that the month of February in Cunayala, which is Iguana Moon, Arini, is the month of the revolution. It is the month of the Dule Revolution of 1925, when Cunayala fought the physical war. There were battles, there were skirmishes, and they won their sovereignty from being part of Panama or Colombia, because at one point I remember there was talk, my uncles and my grandfather had to choose whether they were going to be Colombians or Panamanians, and so our nation is split by that geopolitical border. But my family and my peoples right now are preparing to commemorate 95 years of the Dule Revolution. And it's a big deal. They reenact, and they use theater to reenact the story. Many Kuna young men ended up on ships, on European ships from the time of the 1500s. One of my cousins told me, well, we're the original Pirates of the Caribbean, because they got on the ships, they got on British and Irish ships to fight the Spanish Armada. So that tradition goes way, way back. And in my grandfather's time, he and a lot of my uncles were merchant marines. They took Kuna boys because they could climb the masts of the three-masted schooners because they spent their lives climbing coconut trees. You know, it's like a major food. So being able to climb. 1923 was when my grandfather entered the U.S. for the last time. He was never legal in the U.S. At that time, another Kuna sailor said, hey, I got a date tonight. She's got a sister. You want to come? And the rest was history. My Rappahannock grandmother married a Kuna man. Her sister also married a Kuna man. And my mother and her sisters were raised in that milieu in an Italian neighborhood in Brooklyn. By the time I came around in the mid-50s and was sent to my grandparents' home for the weekend, holidays, whenever you spend time with your grandparents across the bridge, it was a mixture of very Christian Southern Indians and my grandpa and his buddies spending Sunday afternoons in the front room, drinking, playing the camu, and weeping. And Kuna men really cry. It's not just a little bit. This is what I remember. Them howling for their home. Howling for their home. I was a fully mature person before I got enough money and enough gumption to go put my feet on Kunayala. I've spent, my identity was very strongly indigenous, but it was North. It was here. It was spending my youth in the American Indian movement. It was marrying into, too much information. A Kiowa family in Oklahoma, a Haudenosaunee family in upstate New York, and a Mayan family from Chiapas. So it's a lot of going back and forth. A lot of what my grandfather did when he was able to get his act together with the next door neighbor of the Hopis and Winnebagos, and they had their act, their sideshow act. He wore a big Plains headdress because that was the only way at that time to identify yourself as Indian. You're not gonna get paid if you show up totally in molas. He always had molas on him somewhere. But his friends who were Lakota said, just say you're Sioux. Yeah, we'll cover for you, just say you're Sioux. So there was always that tension of being told by North American indigenous people that we weren't real. And my grandfather performed under the name Chief Eagle Eye. His name in Dulegaya was Sulup Ebia, Eye of the Eagle. So there were things that were real underneath all of the showbiz glitz. My mom and her sisters were raised doing shows and playing Indian. When I got to Cunayala, it was 2008, and I'm very, very grateful that I was able to find my mother's brother, that I was able to go knock on a door and say to who I later found out was my first cousin. Mimi came to the gate. I told her very nervously who I was and who I was looking for after we had to go to several of the Kuna communities in Panama City. And she grabbed her head and said, "Somebody tell your grandfather to put his shirt on." And he came out and he knew exactly who I was. And later on in the afternoon, he went into his room and he came out with photographs of me and of my brother when we were little kids. So being able to connect to family, land, and place grounded me in my artistic practice like nothing else. Going to Virginia, I didn't find family who still lived there, because my family was in one of the ones that fled, but I found place. I found land. I stood on the stories that attached to my great-grandmother was that she's a Rappahannock woman she was raised on the banks of the Rappahannock River in Westmoreland County. Well, there's a part like this big on the map that is Westmoreland County that's on the Rappahannock River, and standing there and putting myself, my hands, my feet in the Rappahannock River, grabbing up the clams, the freshwater clams that were on the river at Cap Point Creek, which is the site of original Rappahannock village, changed my artistic practice in a way that nothing else would. And those are the things that shifted my arts practice to a land-based practice that led me to be investigating the stories that come through land, that spiral of DNA that allows you to listen really deeply. The difference between being Indigenous in Cunayala and here. Kunas are the most visible Indigenous people in Panama City anyway. We're not the largest group, but we're the most visible because we are these walking books. We wear this literature. Huh? And it was really interesting. I was expecting to get the dirty Indian treatment from mestizo Panameños, and they kind of didn't know what to do with me because I'm way too tall, I'm dressed like a Kuna, I've got an American passport and a name from there, and an accent when I speak Spanish. So they're like, what is this? And then I had all Kunas around me, so they were very confused of just how much racism are they gonna let out here, you know? And the other thing that really confused me in Panama City, and in the Comarca también, is that we got the dirty Indian treatment through a really nasty governmental policy that goes way back, as a lot of these things do. We got the dirty Indian treatment from Afro-Panamanians, and I was like, what's wrong with this picture? But what the Panamanian government did was that after the canal was built, which was built largely by labor from Afro-Caribbeans, after the canal was built, there was a large population of unemployed Afro-Caribbean men who were then formed into a police force and sent into Cunayala to control the Indian problem. So there's a manufacture of animosity that is just really ugly there. And at a certain point in Panama City, but Panama City is the most dangerous place I've ever been to in my life. At a certain point, I was just like, get me out of here, and they did. In the Comarca, it is entirely different. And there is still the pressure of, there's an armed border between National Panama and Cunayala. And when my family talks about, well, where were you? Well, is that National Panama? They make a distinction if they're talking about Cunayala or they're talking about National Panama. There's an armed border. When I was there, it was a border that was controlled by Kuna Rangers from a protected area called Nusagandi. And I believe now there's army there, mostly because of the narco traffic. But I would say there are as many similarities as there are differences. And a lot of it has to do with colonial language. Here, I would say a really important thing is to say to people is that you do not confuse Spanish-speaking indigenous people as mestizos from those countries. And from the other side, do not confuse English-speaking indigenous people with gringos, because both has happened to me. Speak Spanish in an indigenous context, especially in the US, and I was all of a sudden, I could say, suspect, is she a Mexican? So, yeah, that's it for now.
Yeah, y'all are awesome. I'm a creature of impulse, and I'm going to be using terminology a lot like spirit because that is what I am. That is everything I operate from. And it's tied hugely into my indigeneity. So I was born in Niagara Falls, Canada, 2 months shy of being born in Inglewood. It was a conscious decision that my parents made. My name is Joseph Adalbert Recinos Celis. I was named after the priest who was my godfather. He passed away, who got my family in to Canada. And I was the second part, Adalbert, is named after the monastery where my family was housed before they came in. So I was given, quite literally, a very gringo English name on purpose. I always knew this. I grew up. I know my family history as to why my immediate family left. I know the struggles. And I know, in that regard, I know who I was. I grew up doing, which I actually later found out, correct me if I'm wrong, the Haudenosaunee migration route from north or from south to north. I actually ended up, my family did that. I grew up in a car a week, 2 weeks. Imagine 3 kids, like ADD like a motherfucker too. Like I feel bad for my parents. But from Niagara Falls straight through United States, through Mexico, into Guatemala. I grew up doing that. And so it's I don't know, I'm shaped by that. I think of Joseph Boyden. Do you all know Joseph Boyden? What's up with that? Joseph Boyden is a famous, or now possibly infamous, Canadian writer who for a very long time uplifted the First Nations voices through his literature. And a few years ago, as all of our reclamation, the rise of the red, is what I'd like to call it, started popping off, his indigeneity got pulled into question, which on the limelight, like actually in the limelight. It became a national sort of conversation, but there were always little bits of this happening throughout his career. There was a beautiful article I read there that I think pretty much summed it up, because in my personal path and journey, I mean, look at me. I grew up in Chippewa, which is a very small, James Cameron's from there, a very small little racist town. We were the exotic family, right? And I'd actually throw in James Cameron because there's actually if you look at the history of Niagara Falls, Thundering Waters, and what I later learned, if some of you are familiar with the Thunder Beings, it's where they go to procreate. It's one of the reasons why I believe my family instinctually and spiritually were called there as well, right? And this is things that I found out later on. It's very much with regards to the both of you, research is the biggest thing, which is why I go back to Joseph Boyden. So right now, who you're looking at and why I do rep the Indigenous card quite loudly, actually, is because in that article that I read, it said that however you identify is up to you. However, if you have the responsibility, and I believe artists are the new gatekeepers and are the new healers, Kah uleo, y gracias, Monique. You actually told me to like go find out what the proper name was. Ancestrally, I did that. Kah uleo, sky earth, is what we call it. And so, why? I digress. So, if you're beholden to communities, if you are an artist and you're speaking for these different communities, it's about the beads that you wear, that your community gives you. That, to me, really helped shape standing on my own too, and being the roots as not only an artist, but finding my roots and digging down deep. If we're artists, if we're giving over our artistic fruits to our communities, to everyone else in that garden, we have to know what type of flower or what type of tree we are, what type of fruits we're given. We only know that by investigating who we are through our roots. And it's an ugly, dirty thing. It hurts. There's thorns in there, there's pollution in there, there's a bunch of shit. You're literally grabbing it and pulling it back up. But since I found out how deep, far down my roots go, I'm like, okay. And that's tied into spirit. It's tied into something that was an instinctual thing that I was called to. I went to Central America by myself and investigated everything by myself. It was a spiritual calling that I had to get out of me. And then I'm still, now that I saw my roots and I know my the fruits that I'm giving, I'm like, yes. But I'm able to comfortably say that I'm Latino. I'm what the gringo más que todo. I speak one language pretty damn well, English, and that's my second language. The other one I'm learning, and the other one I'm still kind of learning, and I'm ashamed to say, like, Spanish is like broken as all shit, but that is who I am. That is what I am, and I'm proud of that. Before, it made me sick to the point that I had to leave, to the point that in my artistic communities in Toronto, they haven't seen me around. I've been in the shadows because it fucked with me. I mentioned earlier I worked a lot with Indigenous youth across Ontario. While I was doing that and learning about it wasn't until I went to powwow in Manitoulin Island that I actually felt like I belonged in Canada, and that way I was welcomed. And it was because I was on the reserve and I was just like, yo, A-OK is A-OK. Hells yeah. Like they remind me exactly of when I did go back to Guatemala. And by the way, I was a gringo there. And then I was like some exotic foreigner here. I didn't belong. Child of two tribes. Many of us are that. It's our responsibility to, especially if we're artists, we have that privilege, that gift, to be able to transcend borders, to be able to look into our past ancestral histories and ask those questions. I suffered a lot in Central America as well. The stuff that I went through there is still resonating and reverberating in my family and my everything. But I'm standing here proud of everything that I went through because I understood what my forefathers and my foremothers suffered. I understand that now. And it only made them and made me who I am today. So when I read that article about Joseph Boyden, it was like, it doesn't even matter how he identifies. What community is going to come up and back him? What beads has he been given? And what beads and what communities is he responsible for? I'm responsible for my family, for myself, on the Indigenous tip, and why I say it proudly is because the adopted family that I am, my ancestral lineage comes from the Quiche Nation, which is at war with the Cachiquel Nation still. I was adopted in by the Cachiqueles, a double foreigner. And I was given the responsibility to not only learn my ancestral ways and my ancestral tongues, but then also a bridge so that the cousins here, nuestros huachalales, Nichis, our First Nation cousins here of the North, so that I could come, learn their ways here, bring it back, and also show them some of our ways and be that bridge. I have that responsibility, and I carry that, and I take it very seriously. And that's why I am proud to say that I am Huete Gringo and I am indigenous.
So here's a question for any and all of you. Do you ever identify as Latinx in the North American context? If yes, if you could expand on that. If no, if you could expand on that as well.
Yeah, my answer is the shortest. I'm not Latin American. And I went back and forth with Carmen several times. I said, why do you want me on this panel? I'm not Latin American. And as mixed as I am, and I'm very mixed, my familial, my genetic, my cultural route to Central America, that's my full bloodline. So that's my Kuna line that isn't mixed with anything else. Rappahannock's got mixed early on. My father is European, like purely European, not even a Canadian or American. My father was a Holocaust survivor and Ashkenazi. So my link to Kunayala in Abiyala is as a Kunadule. Ome Kunadule.
Yesterday, I hear a word that it resonates, or still resonates in my brain. No? We are made of contradictions, no? So I'm made of contradiction. I'm a contradiction. So this is how you look is what you get. This is some people say, but this is not the reality. No, the reality is we build our own reality. So I always felt like I was embraced in a family that embraced that Mexican identity, because I never hear in my family someone say, oh, we not Mexicans. But I always hear part of my family saying, no, we not indigenous. We are Mexicans. And I always question my uncles and my cousins who identify as Mexicans, what you mean with that? Later on, when you immigrate and you came to other country, so people start to calling you, oh, you are Latino American. Oh, so come on. So I'm indigenous, Mexican, Latino American. And later on, somebody call you, oh, you're a man. Oh, I'm a man? So come on, I knew that. Yes, of course, I knew that. But what I discovered later on, that I always been conscious about that, I'm a man who has lots of female energy and who enjoy that, and doesn't mean anything else, that I recognize that female energy on me, and that drives me a lot to do an art or to be an artist, and I embrace that. No, rather to be scared of that thing, so I embrace it. But also, I'm a man, and I like to dance a lot, so I love dancing. So when I arrived to Canada, first thing that I did was I need to go to a club and dance salsa. Because I'm coming from a country who love dance. I'm coming from a barrio that we dance all weekend. So, and I'm coming from a family who love dancing, and my teachers were my aunties. So the ones who teach you how to dance are women, no men. Best teachers are female, so you need to embrace that. So I went to a place already disappeared in Toronto. It was called La Cerveceria, amazing place in Toronto. Yeah, run by Portuguese, not by Latinos or Latino Americans, other kind, where all this community of Latinos, we were there to dance. First thing, I went and invited someone to dance, and she said, oh, are you First Nations? I said, well, I'm Mexican. What do you mean? And she explained to me, you're indigenous from Canada. And I said, well, no, I'm Mexican, I'm indigenous from Mexico. But you are a Latino. I said, well, yes and no. So, yeah, so we are in this controversial thing, that's why I say we are very controversial too. As an artist, we are. As a human beings, we are. As a man, I am. Because people like to put tags on you and put it in the box, you know? So, and I have so many great experience about being an indigenous person. So I was last year in Peru, and I was performing in Peru, and we get a little bit of tourist in. We went out, and I met some indigenous people from Peru. And I was totally, in one moment, I was lost in time, and I didn't feel like I was in Peru. I was totally feeling that I was in Mexico. And I get confused in one moment when I was walking and looking around and looking at the people and saying, are those my family? Are these people, they are indigenous from here? Are they Quechua? Aymara? Are they Nahuas too? Or they're Mixteco too? I have the same experience going here in Saskatchewan to reserve, or going in Ontario to reserve, when in one moment I was in a powwow and a bunch of guys just arrived to me and say, Ani Bojo. And someone started to speak to me in Anishinaabe. And I went back and I said, I'm very sorry, but I don't speak Anishinaabe. And the person went to me back and he said, you are denying your identity. You fucking Indian, practically. And I went back and I said, yes, I'm an Indian, but a different kind, maybe, you know? So one time here in BC, in Smithers, around there, we were performing a show and I was playing a chief, the role of a chief in a play. At the end of the play, it was a Q&A, and someone stood and said to me, you are playing all people. And I went back to him and I said, I'm not playing your people. I'm playing a role. I'm an actor. You know? I'm not pretending being you. I am who I am. I have this thick accent. Do you get it? I was born in Mexico from indigenous roots. I came here as an immigrant, and I have this amazing opportunity to play roles. And this role, it teach me and has taught me a lot about who you are and who is your people. So for me, and this is one of the amazing things that happened to me, is being in Canada. It's an amazing reflection about who you are. As a man, as a human being, as a man, as an indigenous, as a Latin American, but basically, and most important, as an artist. And that's what I go through. And I want people to see me as an artist. I want people to see what kind of work I do, what I'm capable to do. You know? I recognize my limitations. I recognize my mistakes. I recognize that growing in a country which is so macho culture is something that we need to learn about putting that back. So I'm still learning. This body is so contradictorial, if I can say that. So still, you know, today during the pitch presentation was a lovely artist who said, I always love women. I remember that when I was a little boy. I was having issues with my mom because I was pulling the girls when I was in kindergarten and pulling the girls, and my mom told me, yeah, you like girls, but you don't need to treat them in that way. You know? And it's still telling me, no? Like, do you remember those times? How's your behavior now? How you behave? How you tell stories about that part? So I think it's so difficult to identify yourself in one box and to put the tag, and sometimes we play with that. We play a lot with that. I want to go back to is our personal responsibility to search, to look at that, to be conscious, and if you want to play with the tag, do it responsibly.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with that too. So, yeah, I resonate a lot with what you just said. It was really funny. My dad is super macho. Like him and I are not in speaking terms ever since I came back and all this whole entire thing, which is really funny too because he was before I left. I called my dad. It was I suffered a very racist encounter in Toronto at a friend's bachelor party, and I called him up. And this is literally right before I left, and I'm like, Dad, I need to know how red are we, because if I'm gonna go like to Guatemala and dedicate the next 9 months of my life, I need to know. And he's just like, Joe, we're red. It was him that who always said when I was a little kid, don't be embarrassed to kiss other men, like fathers, brothers. If you are queer, fine. Like, also, you are 50% your mother, 50% me, you're a male. And it was really funny because my dad is like the most macho, less homophobic now, but was very back then, like person ever. And out of his 3 kids, I'm the most feminine. Like my sister makes fun of that. And so the divine feminine is always something that was sort of shunned in me. I'm also the only real artist. So again, I resonate a lot with that. And it wasn't until I did my research and I found out that in the Maya culture, the words, what the colonizers would call our empresses or emperors, I touched on this yesterday, is achpop, community leaders, and ak'i, which are day keepers. They were distinguished by jade, by plumas, by feathers and coronas and todo eso. Very much like what you were saying, and you tell your story. We tell our story like that too, but then we identify we also identify your status by the plumage, by jade, where it's located, things like that. And it also serves as spiritual protection. And again, a lot of these communal leaders were spiritual guides, so it just makes sense. But it wasn't until I was researching that Juchkawa, which means mother fathers, that is the original title of any ak'i and any achpop. That means that you have to balance both of those to serve your communities because you're going to be dealing with both of them. So again, I resonate a lot with what you were saying. My being, I play with that. There are times when I feel, and I'm embracing more. I grew up in a very the divine masculine sun energy. I grew up with that. I was kind of force-fed that. I know that like the back of my. You've probably seen it around. It's more of my like hip hop, it's there. The underlying, the artist, the creator, is the divine feminine, is the moon. Y yo soy hijo y hija de la luna. That is in my being. And that was something that my family tried to oppress, and that society here specifically tries to oppress. And it's something that I reclaimed. And yeah, I'm very proud to like tie around with that. And I bring that into Latinidad because there was a while before I left, and I left in 2017, and before I left and when I came back, that I was like, fuck Latinx, fuck all of that shit. I don't know what I am, but I don't want to be a part of any of that community. Professionally, any space that I was holding before, I was like, fuck it. I don't want any of it. Because they were also the source of my pain. And not that actually I was the source of my pain, but the lessons that I learned from them, it was too hard to bear at the time. And now that it's been a few years and I'm really getting into my own again, like I've found, like I mentioned, I know where my roots are. I know what type of fruits I'm giving. I know when the wind goes, like I know how strong I am. I no longer buckle with the wind anymore. And I provide shade for my community and for my loved ones and things like that too. I know, I'm beginning to understand who I really am. So I play with that term, Latino, as well. Because it was actually a conversation that we had at Aluna. I remember years back, Bea, you asked us, you were like, it was at like the forefront of all of this stuff. Would you feel comfortable accepting an indigenous role? And all of the Kanakos there, I'm pretty sure said no except for me. And I still stand by that. I would have no problem if any niche person played a Latino person either. I wouldn't have a problem with that. But that term Latino, I right now at this specific moment, I embrace it. I'm like, yeah, cool. I'm down with that right now. If you want to put labels on me, I mean, I grew up in a house where my stepmother's a psychiatrist, so like I grew up with labels. I hate them, right? But if you want to impose that on me, I know who I am. Let's, yeah, you know.
Okay. Sorry. I don't want to interrupt you, but I think so as an artist, as actors, we have responsibilities. We will play a role. Like that, like, yes, I would like to have many roles as I can. Yeah, yes, I would like to have that, no? You know? Like this past July to August, September, sorry, I was cast as a Mexican agricultural worker. I said, oh, okay, that's great, fantastic. I want to see how those guys work. And I went to the field and I saw them working. I say, fuck, these guys, they really work hard. 2 hours of trying, no? Peeling lettuce, no? And harvesting those. My back was really in a bad shape. So I started to interviewing them and ask them. And I know that we speak the same language. And I met people who know my father from back home, you know, people from their community. And I asked them, how you get here? How you do this? How you do that? How you manage this? And how's to live here far from your family? So I think so responsibility is also to research a lot. When I was asked to play in that play, which it was a play that we performed, I don't know how many times, the role of a chief, or the role of this chief playing Raven Stole the Song, which is a beautiful story from Canada, from this land, you know, a traditional story. So the company requests permission, first of all, from the community to have the story. Second one, it was a responsibility to hear the story from a traditional storyteller. Second one, I did my research and I did my work to be able to understand the environment and where the character is coming from. But you need to go to, I think so sometimes the sources could be not just books or go to the library. The best resource is human beings, asking the people and ask them directly. So I think it's a big responsibility, especially when you play other cultures, no? We can look similar, no? And I'm similar to many indigenous Canadians, yeah? But I don't belong to that culture. So I have a big responsibility when I have been asked to play those, no? And I ask for support from them, no? We have just before an hour ago, I was asking her for advice in terms of using the proper language about how we need to work together to be able to reach our goal, which is putting our work in front of people. So we need to manage lots of protocols. And those protocols also, and that, you know, in Latin America, following protocols is like, what you mean with protocol? No? I want that penacho, and I want to wear it. I want this beautiful, and I want to put it. You know, and that in Latin America, people just work in that way. I want that music. I don't know. I don't want to pay the rights. I just want to use it. Yes or no? Yeah. Okay. I don't want to even care. I was in a company in Mexico. There was the company. It was used to be called the Indigenous Mexican Theater Company. I don't know. I don't remember. Directed by Miguel Sabido, which was no indigenous, but half of the cast we were indigenous. And I remember very well one day say, you know, we need to stop this. You guys need to look other places. I can't handle it anymore. Because it's so hard to run shows, speaking in Nahuatl language, trying to present and trying to open doors in this super racist country for you guys to do it. And one of the things that we saw in Latin America or in our countries is artists, they don't follow protocol sometimes. They just took free speech.
Right.
We have free speech to say, to take, to do. And I think so we have a big responsibility to research, to be honest, at least to follow personal protocols. I have my personal protocols. If I'm working with a specific company, I follow those protocols. Or with artists. If she has a specific protocols that she asks me to follow, I do it. Same, because the more we are conscious about that, we are going to make a really beautiful work. And our souls and our spirits, our ancestors, they're going to say yes, they're going to open the channel, and they're going to send us gifts, beautiful gifts, which is, these beautiful gifts that you wear now, because you earn it, And it's beautiful to see that you are wearing those with pride, That's what we need to do as an artist.
Yeah, everything he said. I flipped the script a little bit. I think responsibility is key, and that responsibility exists among indigenous nations. And flipping it, earlier on when I had first come to Canada, so maybe 80s, early 90s, I would go in for auditions, and directors would say things to me like, "You don't look like one of our Canadian natives." And I'm like, no shit, Sherlock. It's like, it's not what I look like, but we look many different ways. And I was often sent in those years for Latin American roles, especially in television and movies. And I'd go in, and there'd be me, and there'd be a dark-haired Canadian. And as uncomfortable as I felt, I would figure, the times that I was cast, better me than the dark-haired Canadian, because at least I brought some respect, dignity. But they would want me to put on a phony Spanish accent. I don't have a Spanish accent. At the same time, Carlos would be not cast because he has an authentic Spanish accent, or told you're not representing your own people, you're representing something that you're not, right? I've played, unless I've been playing my own work, I've played many different indigenous nations, and I had to learn the language. And it is super, super important in terms of the responsibility as a performer to learn the protocols, but also to really, really put everything you've got into the language being correct. And way back, again, 80s, my opening speech in the Res Sisters was entirely in Cree. Entirely in Cree. And I didn't realize how profound that was until we hit opening night in Winnipeg, as people understood what I was saying, And I almost went up on my lines because people were responding. I was like, I've been out here for months and nobody knew what I was saying, didn't matter. I recently was in a film where all my lines were in Mohawk, which was one of the most difficult indigenous languages here. And they had given me the wrong scene. So the scene that I learned was not my lines. And I finally got with the coach and he's like, hey, that's not the right scene. So they ended up having to put a thing in my ear. So the coach was speaking my next line as I was saying the current one. It was terrifying. But at least the Mohawks, who were some folks that I knew, were saying, yeah, we understand you. Huge responsibility. I didn't care so much about my performance or the film. I cared that those Mohawks who were sitting there in the studio when we were shooting, that they understood what I was saying. I don't go for Latin American parts anymore because luckily there are people like Bea who showed up in Toronto at time and say, phew, I don't have to make that decision, There are now enough Latin American actors in Toronto for there to be sort of a critical mass. And I don't do it anymore. The last time I had to decide whether I played somebody outside of my culture was Roma. I played somebody Roma, and for the same reasons. Well, it's me or it's a dark-haired Canadian, you know? So, I guess the only other little thing, story I wanted to tell about the difference about being a Latin American actor in Latin America, and you touched on a little bit. I'm going to ask you to tell some more about that. It is a story that my good friend and the director that I brought to Toronto to direct Chocolate Woman Dreams the Milky Way, who is a Kuna actor and director from the island of Aligandi. His name is Jose Colman. He is the grandson of the intellectual author of the Dule Revolution. And he had to break down the door of the theater department at the university in Panama City. He had found himself alone, 18 years old in Panama City, threw in with some Kunas who were doing popular theater on the street and decided he wanted to be an actor, but they kept turning him away and saying, we have nothing for someone like you in the theater department. And he was so persistent that they finally let him in. And for many, many years, he was the first professionally trained Kuna actor in Panama, and for many years he was the only. So that's a little bit what the difference is. You want to add?
Well, I want to say that also, now we are living at exciting times. Yes, excited time. Bien emocionados estamos. In Latin America, we are very emotional, so we are very excited. Sorry, no emotional, emotional too, but also emocionados porque we are watching amazing work made by indigenous artists, like in film and in theater. Last year I was in Peru, and I attended a festival, and I saw one of the most amazing plays, part in Spanish, part in Quechua. Amazing, beautiful play by this amazing Peruvian indigenous actor, Amiel Cayo. Wonderful, beautiful, amazing. 5 days after, I was in Lima, and I went to see a movie called Retablo, where he's in the movie, and I was amazed. But this incredible actor who is able to be on the stage, and I saw it on the stage, and 5 days after, I saw it on the film, on the screen, and I was blown away by that amazing work. I went to Chile too, so where I met, I was in a project filming a short film in the north part of Chile, in Arica, and I met this beautiful actress too, Aymara, where all these activities. And last year, at Beas Festival, we saw this beautiful, amazing Mexican Zapoteca artist who I know from years in Mexico, Lucas Avendaño, who also brought this amazing work, totally based in his culture, in his identity as an indigenous Mushe Mexican. I was talking to him after the show, and we were laughing because we went to the same school in Mexico. Of course, he's, 10 years or even more younger than me, but we were laughing at the time when we identified ourselves between other indigenous going to the schools of fine arts in Mexico, where indigenous people or black people, we're not allowed to go, but we were there. We stood, we knocked the door. As me, 3 years ago, I knocked the door of NTS, National Theater School, and I say, I want to come here, I want to study here. I need to improve my skills as an actor. And they say, well, you are too old. These guys are 20. I say, well, I don't care. I want to be here. I want to be here. I want to study. I want to improve my skills. So I went and I knocked the door again. And they make a program. And I was able to study there. And I was able to challenge the students, the staff, the teachers, the people, everything, because, we need to move, we need to shake this country. We need to change the institutions for us to be, then have spaces there, to tell our stories, for them to listen our accents and say, oh yeah, you have a very thick accent. Yes, this is the whole package is coming with the accent too. With the talent, with everything. It's part of that. So, yes, we need to get accustomed to hear this, because as we hear other accents, we need to open the door for more people to do it. So I really like that. Yesterday I hear we need to take their responsibility to also get into the institutional part, into those theaters who run only shows in English or who just cast white people. We need to let them know that we are here, okay? So that's part of also responsibility to do those kind of things.
100% for both of that. And I think one thing that's going to be coming up a lot is going to be responsibility and the word protocol, which I want to touch on. Bear with me, I'm going to give a small anecdote, but I'm going to be speaking specifically to the millennials and any generations coming on after that. I'm at the cusp of the millennials, and the reason why I want to shout out to all y'all is because specifically with creators, I know a lot of spirit is going to be coming into the work. It's something that's popping up, right? And there's a reason for that, and we can talk about that later. But I want to go back to this idea of protocol, though. Because I was raised that in order to break the rules, you have to learn them. And if you do break the rules, you have to take responsibility for the consequences of that. Utskabno utskariko. As is above, so below. A cause and effect for absolutely everything. So, protocol. It's very easy for me to go, yep, I'd go out for an Indigenous role, and I don't have a problem if my cousins here go out for any Latinx role. The reason why it's so easy for me to say that is because I'm a part of those communities. Literally. Blood, sweat, and tears. Small anecdote, I love it. So I was out in the Sioux Lakota Nation in 2016 during right when Trump was elected. I was in Standing Rock. And so when we pull up, I get out and I'm asking for directions, and we're on the res, and he was actually a janitor too of a school, and he's just like, yo, cuz, what's up? And I'm like, oh, hey, how you doing? Look, we're looking for Standing Rock, and he just cuts me off. He's like, yeah, where you from, cousin? And I'm like, oh, from Niagara Falls. He's like, no, where you really from? And I started laughing, and I'm like, oh, well, my ancestry is Maya. And he cuts me off, and he's like, no way. You fuckers are still alive? I thought they killed all of you. Legit. And I just start laughing. And I'm like, nah, man, we're still around. And I thought the same could be said about y'all. And we just started laughing, and then we connected, right? But right there, it was just like, I see you, you see me. So it's very easy for me to be like, yo, okay, because I'm a part of that. And it comes down to protocol. And this is, again, why I'm going to be speaking to the millennials and anyone after that. In my circles back in Toronto, again, it blends spirit and artistry. We're reclaiming the word bruja as well, which is an imposed word. Shaman is imposed on us. That isn't even the healers of anywhere in the Americas, all right? That was brought over, I believe it's Siberian, right? That's their healers. But we're reclaiming, specifically in the circles in Toronto, in both niche circles and Latinx circles, the idea of witch, because it's so tied into the divine feminine, La Luna, and that type of stuff. And we were killed for that, up here, down there, right? So we're reclaiming that. And in those circles, I have close peeps who are like, you know what? Fuck tradition. Fuck protocol. Don't need it. We don't know who we are. We look for these elders. We look for these rules, and they don't give us a shot. We don't fit in here. We don't fit in there. Fuck it. We're just going to do it our own way, and we're going to do it with just following our gut. And it's like, yes, but no. Because when you are accessing those, and for me, they're ancestral energies. You think of Lady M, that is an energy magic with a K, consciousness and action. We think of something, and then snap of a finger. It's actual friction. That is an energy. We can't see it, but I'm actually creating energy, a life force, right? That's what we do as creators. So that those ideas, those again, Lady M and Macbeth and that type of stuff, those energies exist. We're calling on those, and our vessels are coming in. So we're playing with these very real energies, okay? And if we're developing and creating off of these things, and if we're literally invoking those things in, and you don't know how to deal with that, and you don't know how to handle that, you don't know the proper language to speak to our ancestors about, that can get you in a lot of fucking trouble. And it can get you in a lot of trouble if you're not even doing that and you start appropriating, right? And that's the problem with, and that's where the breaks I heard go on when I was just like, because, right, but because it's super important. Protocol. You have to learn the traditions, and if you're gonna break them, and not, you have to think about all of those in art as well as in spiritual circles and things like that with regards to protocol and the way we were trained and stuff like that. It's through a colonizer lens, okay? So things do need to get broken. There are things that are outdated. There are things that are outdated. Rules need to be broken. But in order to break them, we need to know historical materials. We need to know how we got those rules, which ones don't fit, which ones actually work. And that's what I want to the younger generations out there, millennials, and off of that, please, 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 the teachers will come to you when you put them out. Be patient and learn the rules, and then go break them. But take responsibility if you're going to, because we are beholden to our communities, to that. We have to respect this. I don't consider myself a settler on this land. I actually believe anyone from the Amariscas, which in my teachings is the land of fire and water. Fire for the volcanoes down south, and water for the Great Lakes up in the north, right? So Amariscas is anyone who identifies and who was born here as part of Turtle Island, Kahuleu, right? So we are more connected. We've been trading for
Millennium.
which is why, again, it's so easy for me to go, yo, my Nish cousins, you want to play that? Fine. Hopefully there's a day where none of that shit matters, but that's why it's easy for me. But it's because, again, I do, like yourselves, I do the research. I know what rules I'm going to break, and I know the consequences of what happens when I do. But because I am a cousin on this part of this land, I check in, always. Protocol, and again, I'm a cousin here. We operate differently. Those of us who are accepted into these circles here, we have to check in. Just like they would check in down south. It's a respect. I see you. Yeah. So that's what I really want to say about the protocol thing. Like, to the younger generations, just be the rebel rousers and break it, but know the rules first and take responsibility for those actions if you do break them.
There's also a difference between what you might do privately in your own practice and what your responsibility is if you're taking that into public. Like, Carlos and I have been checking in since we got here, but what he and I would do personally in our own practice has to be, or in our own rehearsal hall, where we're collaborating, would be different than what would happen publicly, what would happen in this room with everybody else. You know, I usually bring Carlos Copal because that's what his people use. And it's easier than trying to light a charcoal to put a cacao bean on, you know. But we've never talked about that. It's just what we've developed, you know. So that's it's specific and shared and layered, I think.
Right. Okay, so let's come back. 3 minutes is an exaggeration. Let's take exactly 5 minutes, and then we'll still have a solid 35 minutes.